This is another episode of the Masters of Beautiful Achievements. What can we learn from them on how they apply natural science, systems thinking, and personal leadership to realize these beautiful achievements? My name is Alexander Princeton, and great you are listening to this episode. If you're looking for more inspiring episodes, check out my website mastersofbeautifullachievements.com. The link can be found here below. These conversations are made possible by our Patreon and Gumtree community. So I want to thank each of you for your monthly or even your one-time support. Your contributions enables me to create these amazing conversations. So thank you for your support. When you're not a member yet, click on the links below to join and be part of this amazing community. If you're interested in how I can help your business create beautiful achievements, choose one of my Gumtree offers on how you want to engage with me. Or contact me directly via Scope Matters website. And now, it is time to enjoy the conversation with today's masters. So in today's conversation, I'm sitting down with Jason Drew, a seasoned entrepreneur. He calls himself an environmental capitalist. Now, we're going to learn a lot what that means for Jason and how he's going to express that. So first, Jason, welcome to the Masters of Beautiful Achievements podcast.
Thank you for having me.
To start off, Jason, what made you decide to move to more the ecological, let's say, kind of business and bringing those to the market?
I just listed my last business, I call my Industrial Revolution business on the JSE, and been running it quite happily for a year or so, and then had one heart attack, then had another heart attack.
Oh, wow, Jay.
And I went to the doctors and he said, I said, look, I'm fit, I'm healthy, I love going to work. He said, you're just very stressed. I said, I don't really, get that. He said, well, maybe you don't, but your body certainly does. So my wife then said, right, we're going to go and live at our farm. And started getting really in touch with nature. The first thing she said to me is, look, we're going to take our sheep to the slaughterhouse. I said, yeah, we're going to farm manager to do all that sort of stuff. She said, no, we can do all this stuff.
Oh, wow.
And so wasn't really meant to be working and just living at the farm and existing a bit and having a lovely time and getting a bit healthier and a bit fitter and all that sort of stuff. And that's how it started. So I got very much in touch with nature and I decided to spend time with the people who most disliked me because there were so many of them and they couldn't all be wrong. Mm-hmm. And it was really the environmentalists. They were always trying to stop me building our Sky to Earth satellite stations in the middle of some pond that contained some rare animals, I don't know. And they were sort of complaining about doing. And so I thought, I'm going to spend some time with them because it couldn't be me that's just right and them that's wrong. And during that process, living at the farm, got very close to nature, understood their perspective, and really became very environmental in one sense. I never really lost my focus on business as a way of making things happen and doing good things. And if you look at the future, and the future's broken from where I sit, governments don't have the drive or the money to fix it. Individuals are too indebted and too busy sustaining their lives. So who can fix the business? Who can fix the future? And the answer is business has a massive role to play in changing the way it does things and in driving better outcomes. And I then decided to, via 2 years around the world looking at our broken ecosystems, to find some ways that in a business-like manner we could go about fixing things. Because it's all very well having ideas and ambitions, but unless you do something concrete about it, it's not going to work. And environmentalists who don't understand the drivers of business will never get their projects funded. And businesses that don't understand that they are subservient to nature will fail. So you put those two together, and what you need is people who are interested in creating as we understand it, profitable future out of repairing the environment. And that's what I set about doing and creating and investing in a whole series of businesses over the last 10 or 15 years now that have at their core repairing the future. And the more successful the business is, the more good it will do.
Yeah, definitely.
For all its stakeholders, the first of those being the environment and Mother Nature, and then all the employees and stakeholders and each shareholders in the businesses. And people say, well, why do you call yourself an environmental capitalist? I think it's about time to be honest about what we do. I'm an environmentalist, full stop. I'm also a capitalist. And people say, well, that's a dirty word. I said, no, not really. I don't invest in businesses to get an income. I invest capital in a business to get a return. And that, in its very basic definition, is capitalism. Now, it's not the sort of capitalism...
Yeah, but it's also sort of an investor. You don't want to lose your money.
Exactly. And so you've got to tell it like it is. I'm not investing in things to lose half of it or to waste it on something. I want it to give a return, because if I get a return, I can go do more things. And so it's building an ecosystem that works and not living in a world that's disconnected from reality.
No, true. And I mean, what I've also learned is that, I mean, your business has to be sustainable. And in order to be sustainable, you have to make profit. Otherwise, you cannot invest in new technology and grow as a business, or at least progress as a business.
And if your business is doing good, surely you want to do more of it. And if you're making a good profit, you want to attract other people into the business as well, so that more good things get done.
Yeah, true. Yeah, so and you need money to get things going and that's
Sure.
in kind things don't really move forward in that regard.
And they're not sustainable if they're not generating profit or cash or making cash move in a way that people can buy things they need, like food.
Yeah, true. And what drove you to agri-protein? For me, it was in that time a flagship. I visit your farm in, I think it was 2013, and for me it was an enormous eye-opener. That and please elaborate that on the black soldier flies can have such a profound function in turning waste into valuable waste streams.
Insects are remarkable creatures. And so how the whole thing started was, as I mentioned earlier, my wife said we're going to go down to the slaughterhouse. We took our sheep and I went back and went through the whole process and ended up at the back of the slaughterhouse. And there were piles of the straw and hay from the feedlotting business, where they feedlot things into the slaughterhouse. And we delivered our sheep and our cattle at the front end. And at the back, because it's always more interesting to look at the back of a shop and the back of a business than the front, because you learn more. And there I saw rows and rows of manure and blood and guts mixed with hay and straw, turning into compost, and it was surrounded by flies. I was thinking, the flies seem to really like this. And I remembered as a young man, a young kid in fact, here where I am in Yorkshire today, going fishing on the river outside the back of my grandparents' house. And there you either tied a fly onto the end of a line and cast it on the water, or you put a maggot on a hook. You went into the field, broke open a cow dung, found a little wriggly maggot, put it on a hook and put it in the water. So I was thinking, I'd just come back from looking at all the fish farms and looking at the devastation on the Sea of Galilee or the Grand Banks in Canada, where we've fished the fish to extinction, and thinking, this is a good thing. We can fix something here. And if you go into a supermarket today, you find the only big fish you'll find are really salmon, sea bass, sea bream. It's all the same sort of thing, and that's about it really. And the reason that those are farmed is because supermarkets don't want to find trout. Trout's the other one. That there's no trout being caught today. They want it grown in a farm. But you are much better off eating the last fish in the sea than you are farming a seaborne fish. And why is that? Because in the most efficient sea farms in the world, you have to take more fish from the sea, grind it up into something called fish meal, put it into the fish farm to grow a fish. But
because they're carnivores.
Because they're carnivores, that's what they do. That's why they jump out of water at trout to get a fly. That's why they jump to catch a fly on the end of a line.
Of course, yeah.
So it is just a natural thing. And having fish for them as a kid, you can't go fishing with anything else but what they eat. And that's why you put a fly on the end of a line. So I was thinking, the flies love all this waste. Let's take these flies and put them into fish farms. If I'd known how much work it would be, I would never have started. And the bliss of ignorance is remarkable. You think, this must be a simple process. And we'll just crack on and do it, and we'll have it all up and running in a couple of years. And when I met you in 2013 was probably 5 or 6 years after we'd had the ideas. Started it in the tractor shed at my farm, converted that, and we had a hell of a lot of mistakes. Because you get a big factory like the one you came to see that housed probably 1 or 2 billion flies, and keeping 1 or 2 billion of anything alive is a problem, is a challenge. Changing of air, temperature, genetics, making them breathe the right thing, getting selectively choosing females that lay lots of eggs that give children that survive. It's a quarter of the globe's population in terms of humans stuck into one factory.
If you put that in perspective, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And by head count, the single biggest farm operation in the world by a long way. So, yeah, and the challenges doing anything that's new are always interesting. But, we learn from failures, and if you have an absolute goal and you're absolutely clear about what the goal is, when you get blown off course, you just reset your sails. It makes my life much easier. If you just know where you're going. So where we were going is to recycle waste nutrients and put them back into the food chain and create a circular business in the same way that happens in nature. When a cow leaves manure in a field, the flies settle on it, they lay eggs, birds come down, peck into that, chickens scratch to look for the larvae because that's what they eat. And if you go further, you see that the reason that chicken eats larvae out of dung rather than larvae out of anywhere else is because if you were born in a pile of cow manure, you have a very good immune system. And you have, as we now know, what larvae emit is something called antimicrobial peptides. So these are natural emissions that reduce the bacterial count, because when you've got a decomposing protein cell, two things want it. One is a bacteria, and the other is a passing bird, because they want the protein. And so larvae emit an antimicrobial peptide to kill or restrain the bacteria so that they have food to eat. And when the chickens eat those larvae, they acquire that immune activity themselves. So it keeps them much healthier. It's why are you surprised that chickens and birds live in the wild? They don't have antibiotics. True, but they get them from eating insects that are growing shit.
But it's. I mean, I'm amazed just because you just opened up how the cascading works in nature, with specifically with, let's say, secondary metabolites, enzymes that animals, in this case flies of larvae, extricate, and it is also as opposed to the sterile food production we have now, where all the bacteria, antibacterial properties are not included in the food we eat. This is just an example that we just need to move back to how natural processes work.
I mean, nature is much cleverer than us. Nature has been around for forever. In any fight between humankind and nature will win, because it doesn't care.
For sure.
And so, also, so much more has been forgotten than we will ever understand for years to come. So
what do you mean look at that?
Well, so we have forgotten how much we used to live on. I mean, if you go back to ships sailing across the oceans, and the sailors would have biscuits that were infested with maggots, and they just eat them. It was very good for them. It provided them antibiotics, provided them all sorts of things. And you think, that's awful to eat, but the sailors were much healthier than the ship-borne people, than the land-borne people, except for the fact they didn't have citrus fruit and scurvy and those sort of things. But if you look back and look at what has created some really interesting things over time, it is nature and our interaction with that, and we've forgotten so much of it. I mean, take something very simple like the barrel, the oak barrel.
Yeah.
Now, the Greeks kept their food in clay amphora, clay-shaped pointy things, which is very impractical because they had a pointy bottom. But anyway, they couldn't make flat ones anyway. Then the Greeks and the Romans used those. Then the Romans conquered into Gaul and Germania on the west side of the mountain range that runs through Europe. Today's broadly France and Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And they discovered that locals stored everything in carved out oak barrels held together with strips of willow tree. And the Romans said, yeah, this is much better. The water lasts longer in these, and everything you put in them is preserved. And that is because oak contains natural antioxidants. It's why an oak tree lasts for 1,000 years. And until the 19th century, oak was carried on ships in oak barrels. Until they invented, really at the beginning of the late part of the 19th century, stainless steel. Because if you kept them in iron or anything else, the water just goes off. You can't keep it in plastic for very long, it just goes off. So the only thing that works is stainless steel, but it's 2,000 years between the Romans invading Gaul and the invention of stainless steel. And in the meantime, we kept everything in oak barrels. And funnily enough, it's really only oak from France, and to a lesser extent Germany, and the east coast of America that works, American oak. So all modern barrels today are made out of those two things because the ground is rich in silicates that the trees adopt and gives them their natural immune system. And so oak is a natural antioxidant and is a great replacement for sulfur in wines. Of course, then the Romans kept their wine in it, and we get used to the taste of wood in wine. And when the French monks invented spirits in the 16th century, before that they didn't have spirits because they didn't have stills, they couldn't distill stuff because they didn't have metal. And where did they store it? They stored it in barrels. And barrels are what makes spirits drinkable. Now we think that it's normal to have a whiskey that tastes of wood, a brandy that tastes of wood. But actually, without the wood, it's a chemical alcohol which is undrinkable. And it is only the oak that gives it the flavour and that breaks down the chemical nature of the alcohol to make it consumable. So it's interesting. So you take things like that we've forgotten. We're now in one of my companies making natural antioxidants out of oak extracts, the bits of oak they throw away when they're making barrels. So there's a huge amount out there in the world that we've forgotten about. You look at the instance now of the use of extracts of cannabis or cannabinoids as replacement for things like fentanyl in pain management, and certain extracts of cannabis are as good, if not better, than managing pain than cannabinoids, and much less addictive. Some of the interesting work going on at the moment is extracts of magic mushrooms. So psilocybin. If you look at the Mayan temples around their religious areas, they have interpretations of humans with magic mushroom-shaped heads or hats, and they use that to bring in spiritual processes. And if you look forward today, there's a trial we just supplied some extracts of magic mushrooms to in Spain, looking at how they can use specific extracts from it at a pharmaceutical grade in order to reduce the incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder in soldiers, to reduce calm. And if you look at some of the specific extracts of cannabis that we make in Cape Town, funnily enough, we make it to prescription order for export to Germany and to Australia in particular. And that is to deal in particular with reducing stress in people undergoing chemotherapy. So there's an amazing amount of stuff that we can use modern science to take broad interpretations of ancient solutions and remedies to improve our modern world. But what we do is we disregard everything that is ancient or ancient wisdom, because of course some of it is mixed up with some unusual thoughts that are no longer current. But we disregard all of that and just think chemicals best, but it's not.
No, and that triggers with me that I know from the willow tree it has I don't know, I think it was anti-cancer properties or something.
Lots.
And we synthesize that, and there is a difference between the biological molecule and the synthesized molecule.
For sure.
And we synthesize that because it was cheaper. That raises then the question with that extraction technology, and I don't know if you have an overview of how the market is moving forward. Are we able to get the costs down that it becomes attractive to actually move to the biological molecules?
Radically so, but there is a difference and an intervention that is really becoming very prevalent now. So that is, you take taxicol, for example, the chemical extracted from yew trees. That is another key ingredient in most anti-cancer preparations. Now, the chemical copy is not as efficient as the original one. But to get hold of the original one, you need to grow yew trees for quite a long time, cut them down, throw away 99.99% of the yew tree to get the bit you want. It's not a very good process. So the appliance of science now is looking at a whole series of production systems that take the cells you want, the natural real cells, and cause them to replicate in a bioreactor using nitrogen as a feed. So then you only grow the cells you want without the rest of the tree that you don't. So you get natural cells that are replicated in a time frame that is commercially viable without creating the waste. You can then use the land that you had allocated to the growing of whatever plant it is you want, and get the outcome. I was visiting a factory the other day that does the saffron. So instead of growing the whole plant of which the saffron is the stamen, you simply grow the stamen cells in a bioreactor and dry them, and you have dry, perfectly natural saffron without the fields, without the fertilizer, without the waste, and at volumes that make it attractive to do. So there's a whole industry coming up very rapidly now.
And is there an analogy to stem cells? I mean, from a human perspective, because how do you translate, let's say, the stem cell perspective to let's say the plant plant cells?
Stem cells are different in that they contain the genetic code to replicate almost any cell, and all our cells are so very different. This is a different type of process where you're taking the cells or group of cells you want out of a plant and multiplying them without the plant being present.
And how do plant cells know that they can multiply without
because
a defect?
What they need is what the plant gives them, which is water to some extent, but more particularly the chemicals coming out of photosynthesis, which is particularly nitrogen, which feeds the plant cells and allows them to replicate. And it is those triggers that allow those cells to replicate. So given the right conditions of a mix of nutrients and all those things, you can cause plant cells to replicate, but not the whole plant cells, but just the plant cells you want, the ones that contain taxicol, for example, or that are the plant cells of the particular type that are the stamen of the crocus, which is the saffron. You just grow, you isolate that cell and cause that cell to grow or replicate multiple times.
But that means that you can do with vanilla flavor, you can do with secondary metabolites that the plant anyway produces, and once you have this cell and you figure out how it wants to multiply. I don't know if every cell is the same in a plant.
Beyond my pay grade. I've only been to the factories and looked on the outside. I'm an investor, not a genius.
No, but I understand that, but it's interesting if you draw a line further, what that will imply for the, let's say, the future of maybe pharmaceutical or let's say medical, that we can find the biological source, which is much more efficient and effective than a chemical one.
So there are two sort of mega trends that are happening at the moment for me. One is the replacement of chemicals with natural substances.
Yeah.
And the second is the manufacturing, for want of a better word, of those natural substances, which are typically only ever elements of a plant, in a way that allows you to do it at scale without the traditional inputs that you need for growing plants of nitrogen, potassium, phosphate, soil, and. So I find it very interesting that we can get back to natural solutions with factories facilitating the natural replication of cells rather than the chemical equivalents. And I suspect that this will only be good news. you never know what's going to happen. But I just love the idea that you don't have to create an immense amount of biomass to throw it away to get at the few cells you want. You can take the cells you want and replicate them. And I must have seen 5 or 8 businesses in the last months doing that. And I've also seen some very interesting businesses that are using cells to using implants into plants to grow particular types of cells, particularly recombinant DNA, for example. And there's a firm I visited recently that's using tobacco plants to create these recombinant DNA cells, proteins effectively, that are used particularly in vaccines and in vaccine detection systems. So rather than creating these cells chemically, they take the cells they want, put them into a tobacco plant, grow the tobacco plant, and harvest the replication of those protein cells they want from the tobacco plant rather than from animals, which has been the typical way of generating more of an specific protein that happens to be an antidote to a particular thing you don't want. So rather than injecting a pig, typically, and getting the pig to produce lots of antibodies to this, and then slaughtering the pig to get the antibodies out, which is not a great thing, particularly if you're a pig. And to get a tobacco plant to do that is much less harmful for the environment, because a pig is a much more complex and alive creature, and one could argue about the life of plants.
I said, Jason, the plants. I had read a book about the plant revolution, and it was a scientist from north of Italy who described that plants has a lot of senses, and is actually, I mean, it's bad news for vegetarians because a plant also feels when it's chopped down, it feels pain.
For sure, you look at fungi and the great relationships that they have between them and trees, and how trees effectively communicate via the fungal network.
Yeah.
So when one starts to be chopped down or eaten by an elephant, it's very quickly pass the messages to the others to start, turning their leaves more acidic so that the elephants don't want them. So then the elephants don't eat a whole grove of the one tree. They just eat the first 1 or 2. So yes, I agree with you. There's much more to the whole of the world and the whole of nature than we see. But I think beginning to understand it and beginning to drive a future for ourselves and beginning to understand how we can imagine a world that is much less destructive through the use and the appliance of science to natural phenomena is really something fascinating.
Yeah, and to get back to agri-protein, because I understood it ceased to exist. And for me, it was like, I mean, I visited you guys, as I mentioned earlier, in 2012, 13, and for me, that was like the first time I ever heard of an entrepreneur scaling up black soldier business just because it made sense from the power of flies and that potential. And then it saddens me that I had to hear that agri-protein sort of ceased to exist. So from an entrepreneur perspective, because this is what I also see in daily life, I mean, a lot of businesses do not succeed on so many reasons. And to get through all the challenges is only left for a few who then upskill and sort of to take the global world in a way. What lessons can we learn from your experience with agri-protein on upscaling a completely new industry? Because that is actually what it was.
So we took it from our tractor shed, built a large farm you saw in Cape Town. We then had a plant in the Netherlands, a plant in California, and looking at plants and trying to expand ones in Korea and North Korea. And then we got into the COVID area. Goldman were running our latest round. They found difficulty closing the round, and one of our investors, who was a large privately owned international retail chain, supermarket chain, decided to buy out the business and take it to help them deliver their vision. So they're a very green focused business. They take all the plastic from their straws and recirculate that plastic to create Euro pallets, so the pallets that things sit on. They take all the waste cardboard from that and make paper and paper products for their internal group stationery, and they have vision that they're taking forward with our agri-protein business to take all of their waste food food offcuts, byproducts, and recycle those waste nutrients into protein again for their food cycle. So when they succeed, and they will do because they're a very large and very profitable firm with a real purpose and a real use for this technology, they will take it, we hope, up their food chain. So they will go to people who are growing vegetables or growing meat for them and say, look, you have a lot of byproduct waste. We would like to have that waste byproducts because we can recycle it back into the thing, reduce your costs, which helps our consumers. And to be honest, you can only really do that as a privately owned firm. It's very hard to do that as a public company because you're driven by this quarter's profits, next year's numbers, and you're not driven by a vision of the future. And that's why, there's an interesting mix between private and public businesses that can take a different stance on the future because they have different timescales in which they need to deliver solutions.
So actually, the downside became an upside because are you able to mention the company?
No, because we signed an NDA on signing.
Okay.
We're not allowed to mention.
But it is good that they bought the business eventually because they could plug it in their whole supply chain. So basically, they become a solution provider themselves, purely out of their vision.
Yeah, and they have,
and that's amazing.
They have in the last 3 or 4 years spent $3 or $4 billion buying waste companies around in Europe and in North America, so that they can handle more waste and recycle more waste and do more useful things with it. I mean, things have their life cycle. I mean, I was early on when I was looking at flies, I wanted to understand how I could do more things with the flies because, we were applying a lot of capital. We spent tens of millions of dollars on building and improving our processes. And so anyway, I'd understood that Oxford University was leading the world in the establishment of the whole genomes of a whole series of things they did. Part of the initial one that did the human genome, they then did the genome of the fruit fly, which was the second animal to have its genome mapped, and the first animal into space. Funnily enough, most people think that the first animal into space was a dog.
Yeah,
they
or
sent
a monkey,
up, or a dog or a monkey, depending on Russian or Americans. And actually, it was the fruit fly because they sent them up into space to see what happened, because you could see the whole life cycle in 6 or 8 weeks: birth, death, life, reproduction. All you need is a bowl of sugar, and you don't need to. I mean, to do that with dogs or monkeys would take a long time. The spacecraft would be very messy when you got it back down.
Yeah, and all the feces you need to figure out
exactly.
where to put that.
So they wanted to see what happened, and by sending things into space, would it ruin their genetics? Would they be unable to mate or breed? Because they knew nothing about space. And so they went out there. I digress. I know too much about flies. Anyway, so I went to see these guys. I said, I want to understand more about the genetics of the black soldier fly because we want to breed from them. We want to selectively get females that lay more eggs. We want to have ones that bigger children. I mean, if you look at sheep today, you walk out into a field and you say, oh, isn't it amazing all the sheep have twins? No, we spent 10,000 years. If you have one lamb as a sheep, you get eaten straight away. If you have 2, you get 2 or 3 breeding cycles. That's why all sheep have twins. Just selectively bred over 10,000 years.
Oh, wow.
It's not by accident that every time you see a sheep, it has two lambs with it. And in the same way, I wanted to cut that cycle much quicker and do it with flies. I wanted the same sort of effect. I wanted flies that had 50 kids, not 2. And anyway, they said, no, what you need is a whole series of pheromones. You need genetic testing to keep separate colonies so you don't get interbreeding and drop the colony and all these sorts of things.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
And, first thing I want to do is separate out the boys and the girls because you never see 12 bulls with 12 cows in a field. You see 1 bull with 12 cows. And naively, I thought you could do this with genetics. Says, no. What you need is pheromones. You get 2 cages, 1 empty, 1 full. Effectively, you get some Chanel number 5 on this side, spray it into the cage, and all the guys will go this way, leaving the females on their own. And this is how you separate them out. And so what you use pheromones, not genetics, to do that. And anyway, these guys said, Look, I've just finished the genome of the Aedes aegypti mosquito. I said, well, that's very interesting, but I'm just a simple businessman. I don't really understand this. I said, no, we've got a stunning business idea. I thought, oh, no. And it turned out they had, and I was wrong. So their concept was to take the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which carries dengue fever in particular, which is present in countries that are typically more wealthy than those that are affected by malaria. And in fact, the malaria...
Do they know why?
No, I don't know why. But the malaria bug is carried by 4 species of mosquito, whereas the Aedes aegypti is the only one that carries dengue fever.
Okay.
And so dengue fever is more present in places like Brazil, Singapore, in the middle countries around there. And anyway, so their concept was very simple. They worked out the genome. They were able to alter the genome of the male mosquito. Go back one step. Male mosquitoes don't bite, only female mosquitoes.
Yeah, because the female wants the protein for the offspring.
Exactly. So males don't even have the mouth parts to bite. As a result, males live outside, females live inside. Males are pollinators, females need to live somewhere where there's blood.
Interesting.
And so when you fog streets in Brazil, you kill mostly the males, because the females are inside their houses and people shut their curtains when the fogging trucks go past with the mosquito pesticides. Anyway, so their concept was to create sterile male mosquitoes. And you can make them unsterile in the presence of a particular formulation that doesn't exist in the wild. Therefore, you can breed sterile male mosquitoes. But the broad idea was that you create a sterile male mosquito, you release it instead of using pesticide. The male goes to mate with a wild female, the female lays eggs, eggs don't hatch. Quite simple. Then, as usual, the theoretical world meets the real world, and everything goes off the rails. So the first trials, I think, were in the Cayman Islands, and there it was considered a fair disaster because large amounts of male mosquitoes were released, and people began to understand the purpose of mosquitoes. So what happened is that the fish started dying in the dams. The rat population exploded, and they were running all over the streets. The swallows left the island. And when you get down to it, it's the following. Mosquitoes lay eggs in water. The baby eggs are eaten by the hatchlings of the fish. Very intense protein and that type of stuff. Then, as the mosquitoes hatch, they come to the surface and they break through the surface. And on the surface sit little things called boatmen, little long-legged creatures that skitter, and they eat the mosquitoes as they're emerging. And the boatmen, in turn, are eaten by the swallows. I always thought the swallows were dipping their beak into the water. No, because you dip your beak in at 30 kilometers an hour, it can tumble over and you're going to break everything. So they're picking those boatmen off the water. And then the rat population exploded because mosquitoes pass diseases between rats in the same way as they do between humans. And that's why the rat population exploded. So it looked like it was going to be a disaster. And then the scientists went back and they genetically stained the mosquitoes with a stain that they bought off somebody else. So that by using torchlight, you could tell which were mosquitoes coming from the company and which one were wild mosquitoes. And they then showed that the average mosquito never moves more than 100 meters in its lifetime. Now, take that to a housefly, which will move 3.5 to 5 kilometers. A mosquito invariably will lay its young in the puddle from which it was born.
Yeah.
In a 6-week cycle. So then you take this and you think about it and say, right, if I want to protect this village here, I draw a circle around it 100 meters wide, 100 meters in diameter. Sorry, in radius, 200 meters in diameter. And on that circumference, every 100 meters, I release sterile male mosquitoes. Then you protect the inside of that circle and the village where the humans live, but not the outside area. So you're not trying to blanket the problem. Then if you want to provide 12 weeks, 2 life cycles security, you do them at 200 meters. So one at 100 meters, one at 200 meters, and release them all at, and you get then 12 weeks protection. If you do nothing, within one life cycle, 6 weeks, they will have moved to 100 meters, and another another life cycle, another 6 weeks, they'll have moved back to the village you're trying to protect. Now, Brazil does spend roughly $2 billion a year on anti-mosquito pesticides. And so the company was doing quite well, replacing those pesticides. It's better than spraying, it's more effective because the males will always find out the females and they'll go and find them. Releasing the males doesn't end up with more people being bitten because the males can't bite. And it was starting to get some good traction. And then you always need a bit of luck. Then a new disease emerged, particularly in Brazil, that carried again by the Aedes aegypti mosquito, that caused birth deformities.
Yeah, that was like a couple of years ago.
4 or 5 years ago now, yeah. And the mosquitoes that were carrying this were starting to move north. And the FDA then approved the release of these mosquitoes in Florida to cause a natural barrier to stop the mosquitoes moving up from the northern states of South America. And that FDA approval triggered the acquisition of the business by a very large, well, it's a matter of public record, a very large American life biosciences company. And they took it on and are now has its part of their stable. They're developing it quite successfully into agricultural pests and other types of things, and taking it on a scale that a smaller business could never have imagined. So these things need to change hands at some point in time in order to get the truly global traction and that type of thing. So it's a very interesting thing. It was the first insect-based business to be sold for 9 numbers at $146 million to Intrexon. Intrexon's a public company, so it's a matter of public record. So that's very interesting. So things have their life. But that's an example of things that came out of a good idea that ended up being a large part of our future, I hope, in that we have to embrace science. We can't purely find 100% natural solutions to many of the problems we have, because there are 7, 8, 9 billion of us.
Yeah, and what strikes me on this example is that also we need to take account how ecosystems work.
Sure.
And manipulating, let's say, the mosquito population trickles down through the whole value chain, and affecting biodiversity, and that's the last thing you want in a world where the biodiversity is already shrinking at rates we cannot comprehend rationally.
If you look at what Intrexon's gone on to do with their cotton boll weevil, for example, you go over cotton fields that are using Intrexon's insect technologies versus people using pesticides, and you can see the difference between the fields. I mean, these are huge, immense, multi-thousand hectare fields. You get one field where the birds and bats and raptors and everything else, because there are insects, rats, snakes, everything else, on that field there isn't the cotton boll weevil that allows you to buy your cotton t-shirt for $10 or whatever it is. And you look at the other field that uses pesticides, there's nothing there, no birds overflying it, nothing, because there's no insects, because it kills all the insects. So selectively removing things that allow you to carry on monoculture to keep the billions of humans going is interesting. Talking about clothes and that sort of stuff, I went to see a very interesting business the other day that has really developed something quite interesting. So it has worked out how to separate garments made of mixed cotton and polyester, or garments that are made of mixed polyester and nylon, and they dissolve out those, fractionate them. So you can take cotton clothing that you can't really recycle if it's mixed with polyester to create a more better structure. You can't take a pair of nylon mixed with polyester clothes and recycle it, because you couldn't separate all the chemical elements. So now what this company does is it takes the wool or cotton that is impregnated with other things to create stretch, or even just the stitching. this is a cotton shirt, but the stitching is nylon. And so you can now dissolve the shirt, take out the nylon from the stitching, reuse that nylon, and then the cotton is as recyclable as cardboard or paper, but not when it's mixed. And so it's that technology to separate out those two things that is going to drive a revolution in the recycling of clothes, which is such an important thing. You can do and take the.
But that also implies that we need less virgin cotton in a way. Can they recycle?
Hugely.
I mean, the dissolved cotton can be
the cotton
used as cotton again.
The cotton isn't dissolved; it's the plastics mixed in with it, the stitching. So, and you can't recycle the cotton because it's got bits of plastic in. You put it through a heat process and it melts and it goes wrong. You melt out the thing that takes your cotton shirt. That stitching is nylon, not cotton.
Yeah.
Although it's 100% cotton, it's 0.1% is the stitching between these 6 panels. But it means you can't recycle the cotton. Then you can recycle all the cotton. Help yourself.
Oh, wow.
So these sort of technologies are really changing the world, and which I love investing in, because that's going to be much more profitable than growing new cotton using fertilizer, using nitrogen, potassium, phosphate-based fertilizers. And will it put some cotton farmers out of business? Probably. This is not a bad thing.
No, especially the cotton farmers who are not running it organically. And I think, we need the soil which is there on the planet, and there's too much already depleted.
Soil's one of my favourite subjects. Everyone thinks we live on Earth. We don't. We live on.
That's an interesting mind. How do you call it? A mind game, yeah.
So we live on a mass of molten rock, surrounded by a slightly cooler layer of much thinner rock. On top of that, we live on a very, 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 very thin layer of soil that we call Earth. And we do 3 things to that Earth or soil. We build on it, we poison it, and we wash it into the sea, the one place it can't be recycled from. The UN said 5 or 10 years ago, we've possibly got 80 planting seasons left. You say, why? So because for every human on the planet, we wash roughly 2 cubic meters of soil into the sea every year. And you take the amount of topsoil or earth covering the rock on which we live, and there's not much of it. And it's disastrous. And the poisoning of the soil, the lack of comprehension about the interaction between nematodes, the soil, the earth, and everything else is not clever. And you think at the end of the winter or the end of the autumn, you get a pile of leaves the size of a room. When you go back and look at it, it's just that thin. If we make a few millimeters of soil a year, it's a lot. And yet we wash centimeters away into the seas every year. It's one place you can't get it back from.
Yeah, because then it's just all. Yeah.
And you look at our the same with our toilet systems and all that type of stuff. We wash extraordinary amounts of fecal matter and urine through our sewage plants, or even without them, into the seas every year.
Yeah.
And it's useless there. For the last 8,000, 9,000 years, we've been putting that onto the land and using it. So in the 17th and 18th century, people would come around and buy your urine from your houses in towns and cities to go and operate the tanning factories, to tan the leather, to make leather for leather goods and all that type of stuff, because that's where you got uric acid from. And the fecal matter would go out, they put it onto the fields, because that's where it's of use. It gets broken down.
Yeah,
it's a natural process.
Feces supposedly should be on the soil. That's where we normally would.
There's some difficulties there in some extents, particularly around the use of and the amount of pharmaceuticals in our urine.
Yeah, but that is just the reason. That's, let's say, after the 1900
Yes.
and the increase of pharmaceuticals. Yeah.
So when I mentioned earlier about the mosquito business, and then the we talked about the cotton boll weevil, but actually it was the diamondback moth. So I happened to have been in Kenya with my brother looking at looking for somewhere for diamondback moths to use trial sites. So they're diamondback moths are the things that attack boracic vegetables like broccoli, like cabbages, and they're exported from Kenya by plane, which is great environmentally, to Europe, and they get eaten by things, so they cover them in pesticides. And anyway, we were up there, and my brother said, "Look, I've heard about these young guys with a fascinating business in Kariba, which is the slums in Nairobi." And I said, "No, you go." He said, "Jay, you'd never give up on a tutor. Sometimes I've got a lot of work to do, emails, that sort of stuff." Eventually, he hounded me, said, "Right, come." So we got him, we went. And it turned out to be one of the most interesting businesses I've ever invested in. And then it was very small. I sold out my stake in 2019 or 2020. And by then it had grown to 3,400 toilets. So 85% of the population of Nairobi lives on 15% of the landmass, which is the slums. And in the slums, there's not much, not much electricity, no sanitation much, not even much hope really. And anyway, these guys had worked out a very clever system. So they built toilets branded Fresh Life, as it happens, that are 2 by 1 meters. And inside the toilet is a separator toilet, so inside the wall operation. And all animals on the planet, including humans, urinate forwards, defecate backwards. Bulls, cows, all animals is just how it works.
Even insects, I learned.
Yes. And so what you do is you put effectively 2 milk churns under the toilet, separate out the urine and the feces, and you sell the toilet on an interest-free loan for $500, which is what it costs to build roughly, to an entrepreneur. They charge the local community 5 Kenyan shillings, 3 US cents to use the toilet. The average entrepreneur, 95% of whom are female, then has a business that generates between $4 and $6 a day, sometimes $7 a day, providing a great service to the local community. Then Sanergy, as the business is called, goes around and collects those fecal matter on very narrow trolleys between the shacks, and for $100 a year, which is not huge in comparison to the $2,000 or $3,000 it's generating, 5 times 3, 6, 5, $1,500, $2,000. And then all the waste is taken out of the slums, rather than the traditional system in those slums, which is you get a plastic bag and flick your business over the nearest shed in the direction of someone you don't like. The flying toilet. So this is providing a sustainable system where you've got now many thousands of people operating toilet systems which take the waste out of the slums where it can be dealt with. Some people
sort of like we used to do in our past.
Exactly. So you look at now, some of those people have 2 or 3 or 4 toilets, and they can then send their kids to schools and do all sorts of interesting things. And so what we then do is the people who started the business which I invested in, take out the fecal matter and they compost that using flies from us, as it happens. And that breaks down the fecal matter and all that type of stuff. Then you take the urine and put it into those standard 1,500 litre containers, and leave it to settle. And urine is by its very nature 15% nitrogen. The nitrogen breaks down any genetic material in the urine, a bit of trace of blood or whatever it might be, because that's what nitrogen does.
Including viruses?
Nitrogen's a very powerful, pure nitrogen kills most things. You take that 14% nitrogen, take it down to 100% nitrogen, and you get a very powerful cleaner, disinfectant agent. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is that you get a solution that is substantially nitrogen, 14%, with a bit of potassium, a bit of phosphate. You balance up potassium and phosphate, and you end up with a liquid NPK fertilizer, which you can choose 321, 325, whatever the application is, and you can then sell that to farmers and make a profit. Runs the whole business. So it's a very good modern interpretation of what we used to do is defecate and urinate on our fields because we knew it was good for the fields. We never used to throw it into the river systems and throw it away because there's no such thing as away in nature. What you've eaten is vegetables that are full of NPK because that's what's used to grow them, either naturally or forced through fertilizer. And that's what's in you. So it has to go somewhere, it goes out in your urine. And that's why urine is useful. And that's why fecal matter is also useful. So we need to be less squeamish, and we need to understand these natural cycles that have always existed and always will. And the only thing that's broken these is humans and our industrial revolution in more ways than one. So the industrial revolution was very poor environmentally, but it did keep a lot of people from dying and all those type of things. But the thing that it has done, which is still lingering most in my mind, it has created an educational system that is linear.
Yeah.
So linear things are not natural and they don't work. In order to be able to think non-linearly, you need to think more naturally in circles and cycles.
Yeah.
But everything we do is, you do maths, you do more maths, you do detailed maths, you do super detailed maths, and become the world's best mathematician. But you don't know which plant to eat from your garden unless you buy it from a supermarket. And so we become so linear because of our industrial revolution thinking. And we need to do things differently. The first thing I think we need to do is we need to get out and stay out, as I say. When I'm talking to groups of people, I say, you need to get out and stay out. I say, what do you mean? So you need to get out.
To rich people specifically?
Yeah. So get out. What I mean by that, you or me as a sort of Western European, let's say we live to 75, we will have spent at least 65 of those years inside.
Yeah.
Inside our house, 12 hours a day because we sleep. Inside your office, inside a car, inside a train, inside. How often do you get outside? How often do you take time to look? I think the COVID and lockdown was interesting because people went into their garden and saw things that they'd never seen before.
True.
So get out and stay out is my view. Unless you're spending hours outside, you just can't understand how things work. And if you can follow things through to the end in circles, not in lines, and I fortunately have the attention span of a butterfly, so I'm always flitting onto one thing or other and then trying to work out how they connect afterwards. It's not intentional, it's just a lack of education and lack of attention that enables me to do things differently.
Or a systems mind that the connections come naturally.
So I think it's lovely to be able to get out, stay out, do things differently. And it's down to our education system, which is why I love in particular and try and speak to 10,000 people a year face to face, predominantly kids and school kids, always talking to groups of school kids, just to enthuse them about what's outside, enthuse them about what is possible, enthuse business schools, spoken this year last year at Yale and Harvard and INSEAD and everywhere, and getting people at business schools to see you don't have to go and create the next best app, the next big version of electric car. Go and create something that's wildly different. And why it's much more fun is because people can arrange themselves to help you when you're doing businesses that people understand that help the future. And the amount of governments around the world that helped AgriProtein, for example, facilitate its activities because it was different, because they could see it was good, they could see it made sense, they see it tied into nature, and the more of these things we did, the better it would be. And people say, how can we enable our legislation to make this possible, rather than if I wanted to go and create a new nitrogen fertilizer plant, how can we put more regulations to stop you doing it? So it's much easier to be entrepreneurial in an environmentally sensible manner, at the very root of sensible stuff. And the explosion of ideas and activities I've seen in the last, I see it every year, some extraordinary ideas. Never ceases to amaze me. I'm very lucky because people come to me with ideas to get some input as to how to grow or how to fund it, or they want some money from me to kickstart their idea. And so it's these remarkable things. I've talked about all the sort of separation of the clothing business stuff, which makes a lot of sense to me. It's how I came across the mosquitoes. I've come across some interesting stuff, and it never ceases to amaze me, whether it's using tobacco plants to grow proteins rather than pigs. It's just such wonderful things happening.
Yeah, and that triggers me, because if you look from a systemic point of view, and also the environmental impact certain choices have, do you also advise them to go for a more environmental friendly is the wrong word, for a zero waste business model? Because some ideas always, okay, we do this, and then if you look at it more specifically, you see still some waste streams left.
I see it slightly different. Everyone talks about sustainable development. I think what we need is sustainable retreat. We need to do more with less. So actually take a business that fundamentally, as an output, repairs the broader environment and not just damages it less or less incrementally. You have to really think differently. So it's not, still have two waste streams less. It's actually, if I make this, how is everything better? So the toilet system in Kenya leaves everything better. The mosquito business leaves everything better. Well, apart from the first iteration, but yeah, you're allowed to make mistakes. The agri-protein thing leaves everything better. The Stoke business I have at the moment with the oak extracts just leaves everything better. We have no chemical factories, no nothing. We just end up closing chemical factories down, I hope, because we could do that. So all these sort of things, you just have to go one level deeper to say, how can I really do this so that the outcome is positive? And the more of it I do, the better it is for everybody. Stakeholders, employees, shareholders, everything. And it's just very different. And you get that different thinking by not holding on to fixed ideas, by asking more questions, by listening more than speaking, and by thinking it's possible. It's much more tiring being an eternal optimist like me than it is being a pessimist. Because a pessimist, you don't need to justify yourself. Optimism, you need to justify yourself as to why you're optimistic and think through the reasons. And it's easy to criticize things and harder to do things. And so somebody said to me the other day, do you think we have time to fix the future? And my response was, I know we haven't got time to not start trying, and now.
Yeah, that's true. And I think also, but that's also like changing the rules of the game. I mean, at least in Europe, you see with the European Union, a lot of legislation is falling down on the countries. So I think based on that, sort of like a two philosophies emerging. One of them saying we keep business as usual and we protract everything as long as we can, and then you see the emerging or those with a let's say a more positive attitude who say, okay, well we can take the future in our own hands and we're going to change our own system, our own supply chain, our own value chain, and move it forward.
I think things are changing at such an exponential pace, and humans are very bad at understanding exponential change. Uber spent $3 or $4 billion creating a fantastic system, and they're being uninvented and outcompeted by self-driving automated taxi hire companies. And you have to stay on your feet, you have to think. The only time you don't need to think and you don't need to do too much and worry too much is when you have a system that's entirely intact with nature and is circular in its very nature. And so I love
that is interesting.
Singular businesses, because you can't reinvent nature. There's nothing cleverer. If you think you're cleverer than nature, you're wrong. So if you've got natural, organic-based business, you don't have to worry about the next level of competition, because if you've nailed the link with nature, then you've nailed your business and you've created a moat around it. Nobody else can outcompete, because I've never found anything cleverer or longer-term, better thinking than nature itself. And people say to me, what about AI and everything else? Will AI make everything clever? And I said, well, yeah, AI will definitely do some useful things. And AI is great because hopefully from it, humanity will learn some common sense, and we've lost all of our common sense.
I agree with you on that one. If you read the research of the different AI programs figuring out connections on a medical or in nature, they find reconnections which we've indeed lost for the last thousands of years, and they're like, oh, it works like this. And if you have those books of those inventors who actually took time to go out, it becomes much more evident.
And it's lovely. I agree with you. I don't think anything's going to outthink out. So the only thing that AI will definitely not outthink is nature.
Yeah, that's true. And I know you know Victor Schauberger. I'm a really fan of this guy. He has been written books about his life, and he was a how do you call it, boswachters in Dutch. He was a how do you call that, forester. Let's use that word for the lack of the right word. And he took time to look at nature, but his only defect was that he could not translate that into mathematical equations of what he saw, and what he saw was transcendental on the knowledge of hydraulic engineering, and he could draw everything in perfection. And I think now, with maybe you couldn't call it AI, but more sophisticated computer programs, we can now finally understand what the things it was he drew, and now we can find the technology to actually turn it into a real product. And I am convinced, and you're sort of like motivating or promoting that. If we look more in nature, we learn more how nature works, because we are programmed like nature.
We're a function of it.
And what we see is sort of like, that's how our brain is wired, and we see the technology in front of us instead of going to AI or other technologies just to figure it out. Because if you look at it, you feel that it works in that way, and then turning that into a technology is a next step. But that's
the one thing I'd like to leave you on that with is that humanity and most animals are driven by mammalian thinking.
So help me on that one.
So we think like mammals. We protect our offspring, want the best for our offspring. We will protect everything to keep our offspring going and our genetics alive. So we're programmed and we're driven by fear and greed.
Yeah.
Animals, a fox is driven by fear and greed. Fear of other animals, greed to get what it wants to keep its young going. And I'm not convinced that this fundamental way of thinking is a useful part of our future. So I studied quite a lot on swarm and swarm thinking. Now, ants, I think, are probably the cleverest creatures going. Individually, they're useless. Take an ant, it's just a waste of space. You put them together, and they act as a swarm. They will leave their nest in the morning, and they build nests that are extraordinary, with holes through so that air can flow out and keep it cool and keep it warm in the middle. They go out and they come across a little rivulet of water in a forest. And the first ones to think, I'll build a bridge. And so they get together, build a bridge, and allow all the other ants to cross over them. And at the end of the day, they work their way back into the nest. And they get their share of food just like everybody else does. And nobody gets more, nobody gets less, everyone gets what they need. Everyone has their job. And if you asked any one of them what they did today, they wouldn't have a clue. And there is no centralized brain. They just cooperate together in a way that benefits all of them. Now, this is so fundamentally different to mammalian thinking, which drives us. So we copied, a friend of mine and some partners, a system that applied swarm thinking to the financial markets.
Yeah.
And behaving as a swarm, they do some remarkable things that is just the antithesis of what any trader expects to happen. So the one thing, so the swarm is programmed to deliver a return, which it has done very successfully for the last years. But it has done it with almost no correlation. Now, correlation is the likelihood of other things moving to conjunction. So what's happened over the last 40 years is that everything has become more and more correlated as we've become more diversified. So your pension fund says I must have 2% in gold, 5% in property, 13% in shares, this and it. You think it's very diversified. But everybody else's pension fund right across the world has the same thinking.
Yeah.
And so actually almost everything is correlated. And what we have shown remarkably in the last 3 to 4 years of trading is that we have close to zero correlation to any other financial instrument or market, or any basket of them. So we just don't move in the same way, because fundamentally all markets are driven by humans who are driven by mammalian thinking. When you start thinking and acting as a swarm, you get outcomes that are different to anything that can be imagined by humans, because we can't imagine the things that drive swarm: collective outcomes, selflessness, death of an individual doesn't matter, inactivity of an individual doesn't matter if you're a bridge or foraging. And so this different way of thinking is so interesting to see it expressed in the most mammalian of all things, which is our financial markets, and how the price of corn is, funny enough, deeply related to obviously the price of oil and all these sorts of things. But things you just couldn't see as being connected are connected. And the swarm can see these connections in a way that humans just can't. And so...
And that has nothing to do with artificial intelligence?
No.
That's interesting.
It's artificial simplicity.
Yeah.
And so it's a different way of thinking. All our AI systems are built by humans, therefore built on mammalian thinking, driven by fear and greed. I want to find out the information quickest, fastest, have it there. Everybody who trades is trying to trade quicker in a millisecond or a thousandth of a second. This thing trades once a day. It's the antithesis of fast.
Jesus.
And
this is amazing, Jason.
And it's lovely. And so maybe the next frontier is not only to address the environment in different ways and do all of that, but it's also the way we think, and perhaps even consciousness itself. And I think if I was to say, whom can we learn from, it would be ants, not any mammalian animal.
The way you express it sounds so familiar with my 3-year-old. Because they're all selfish. They just build on whatever is present, and then they play, and they it's like they give the energy to each other, and then they turn things into sometimes such a beautiful plays or whatever, things you could never imagine.
We knock that out of them, but with education and parenthood by the time they're 4 or 5.
Yeah, and that's something I'm gonna do my utmost best to keep it as long as possible, because it's
quite right.
It's such more fun.
I agree.
Also in life, if we collaborate in that way and work together instead of against each other.
It's a lovely way of doing things. Anyway, there we go.
Thank you.
Think about ants next time you tread on one or put some ant powder down. They're beautiful, clever creatures.
Will do. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. Lovely to chat with you.
I'm pleased you took time to listen to the whole episode. Why not consider joining my Patreon to support me in creating more of these conversations? Or even rate my podcast in your favorite podcast app. Thank you again for listening, and join me next time.